Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome on behalf of the Board of Commissioners of Haverford Township, Township Manager Dave Berman, the Parks and Recreation Department, and the committee who worked on this. I want to welcome you to this special day, especially Andy's family and old-time friends. Today is a day for Haverford Township to acknowledge what Andy did for Haverford Township. He was a special man, and he did something truly special for our township. This is a day where joy and sorrow mix, a lot like life itself. But we're here to honor a good man. And I just want to review the program a little bit so you have an understanding of what we're going to do. Initially, we're going to have 5 different speakers from Haverford Township who worked with Andy in different ways in the township to remember Andy and their relationship with Andy. And then I'm going to get up and try to, in 10 to 12 minutes, give you an overview of what Andy did that was so significant to make this park happen. Because we truly would not be sitting here today in this beautiful building if it were not for the efforts of Andy Lewis. So with that, we're going to start our program. At the end of the program, I'll get up and let you know. And when we're done here, we're going to go out to a tree, plant it in Andy's name. We'll ask the family and the commissioners, we'll put some water on that tree, and anyone else who would like to put water on that tree. Then we're going to process up to the area of Freedom Playground and the flag, where there's a special plaque, and the Board of Commissioners is going to unveil that plaque in Andy's honor. And then we're going to provide you lunch for those who want to stick around for lunch. And then the Parks and Recreation Department will give a little overview of how the park is used today. So again, we welcome you. It's a special, special day. And I especially want to thank Eileen Matola and Brian Barrett over on the side there with the Parks and Recreation Department and all their work in making today possible. With that, I'd like to call up our first speaker, Commissioner Larry Holmes. He served as Vice President to Andy when Andy was President of the Board in 2019. Larry?
Having been honored to speak of my friend Andy Lewis, I will not fumble with my own words, but instead will crib from Charles Dickens in Nicholas Nickleby. Among men who have any sound and sterling qualities, there is nothing so contagious as pure openness of the heart. As Dickens noted of Nickleby, I took the infection instantly. From the moment I met Andy in 2003, I knew someone special had entered my life. I came home from his commissioners' debate in 2003 and told my wife Priscilla the Republicans have a dream candidate who's a cross between Bobby Kennedy and Mayor Quimby from The Simpsons. And I guess those were prophetic words because the following January he became a dream commissioner. And during his first term, Andy proved to everyone the value of integrity as well as its price when he bravely stopped reckless plans to spoil this very site that we're standing on today. He proclaimed that the old way of doing things was not the right way to do things. He taught all of us that sunlight was the best disinfectant. Andy's courage in those years inspired future commissioners to stand up to conventional and tired thinking and approach problem solving in a modern, transparent, and more honest manner. Andy and I reconnected in 2005 when Andy took interest in my interest in running for commissioner. And after a half-hearted attempt to turn me to the dark side, he ultimately accepted that I would remain a Democrat and then openly and bravely worked to help me get elected. After my first 2 years on the board, in those first 2 years on the board, I sat directly next to Andy, first on my left and then to my right as our vice president in 2007. In 2007, he followed his heart to Delaware County, whose gain was our township's loss. I checked in with Andy from time to time during his time off the township board and enjoyed several days together during those 8 years, talking about life and politics, often during 4-hour meetings on the West Course and occasionally on the East. And as so many others felt, I was excited to see Andy return to the board in 2016. In a long-awaited display of bipartisanship, I was privileged to be his vice president in 2019. As one of the people in attendance at our reorganization meeting remarked to me that night, "You and Andy make a terrific team. You both have great hair." A more fun year on that board I cannot remember. Proud Boys, drag queens, lions, tigers, and bears. We handled it all with the seriousness some situations demanded and the humor other situations desperately needed. In 2016, Andy presented a township proclamation for my son, who had served in AmeriCorps, and read that proclamation as if he were proudly heralding his own child's accomplishments. How lucky was I to return the favor and present a proclamation for Andy and Wendy's daughter, Maya, when she won a countywide mathematics contest. Anyone who worked with Andy on our board, on Delaware County Council, on the IBC board, or any other organization that benefited from Andy's presence knew the seriousness with which he recognized his duties in those roles. And everyone on those boards enjoyed the cordiality and respect that imbued those interactions. And like everyone I just described, I'm a better person and a better commissioner for having had Andy in my life. I would close as I opened with other words, but words much older than Dickens, from Matthew 23. "Well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master." Thank you for this privilege today.
Thanks, Larry. Our next speaker is Reverend Darren Miller. He's the pastor of the Church of God Christ on Buck Lane, which is in the 5th Ward, Andy's ward, and he was a good friend of Andy's. Thanks.
Good afternoon and greetings to you all. It is never a hardship to be able to speak of a good man. One of the things, you can have a whole lot of attributes, you can have alphabet soup behind your name, but there's one thing to be said of just being good. And truly, I can say that Andy was a good man. Just looking in this room alone lets you know that the spirit of Andy, even though he's not physically here with us, the spirit of Andy in the togetherness in this room is just shown all around us. To his wife, we're praying your strength. To his daughters and all those who carry on his wonderful legacy. I cannot tell you the shock that I felt when I got the news that he had passed on. Even on my telephone right here, I still have the last 2 messages, voicemail messages that Andy left for me. He was just calling in to check and see how things were going and find out if I needed anything. I first became affiliated with Andy. Our church was having a mortgage burning in 2016, shortly after I became the pastor of Memorial Church of God in Christ on Buck Lane there in 2014. And there was something unique about Andy. We contacted his office and let him know what we were doing. Immediately, Andy jumped into motion. The first time meeting him, he showed up at the service in 2014 at the church. Told me who he was. He said, "Oh, I've heard of you." And something was different. Andy stayed for the whole service. Most times, people will come in and they'll do what they have to do, make their presentation, and say, "Oh, I gotta go." Andy not only stayed for the service, but he also stayed for the refreshments after the service. And it was there that I learned that he had a penchant for some things in eating or in the culinary arts. And so immediately we clicked. And from that day until just here recently. We stayed in touch with each other periodically. Andy also visited the church on a couple of other occasions just to stop by. Most notably, we have a food pantry that we began in 2018. And when Andy found out about what was happening in the community, Andy came over to the church. First, he contacted me. He came on over, and not only did he come over, but Andy brought with him a wonderful financial donation from him personally, just to be able to give towards what we were doing in the community. And not only did it not stop there, Andy then sent out an email to his entire constituency, letting them know about the activities in the community over on Buck Lane. And many of you I know in this room responded to that call, and it just again solidified the measure of this man. You know, sometimes we can measure the greatness of a man by his stature. We can measure the greatness of a man by all kinds of things that may be superficial. But it is important for us to know that the true measure of a man lies on that heart that is down on the inside. And I am thankful that today I can stand here, speak to all of you, and be able to call the late Andy Lewis my friend. God bless you.
Thank you, Pastor. And I've been to some of the services, and they are long. Our next speaker is Commissioner Steve D'Amelio. Steve was president of the board in 2006 when they signed the agreement that Andy worked out, which you'll hear more about later. Commissioner?
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. And thank you to the Lewis family, Wendy, Rusty. I met Andy well over 18 years ago when I first became a commissioner, and I was very impressed with him. He was very kind to me, and we talked about this very site that we're here now. And when I first saw the plans and Andy and I reviewed that, it was clear to me that this needed to change. And Andy and I worked together many hours on changing this. And in fact, the Board of Commissioners appointed us as the liaison to the board for the project. He was so kind. Everything you're hearing about him, he was just a wonderful man. Took me under his wing and would invite me over his house, and spent many times out to breakfast with him and had discussions with him about everything, national politics, local politics. But he also had a sense of humor, and we went to see this off-Broadway play, Defending the Caveman. I don't know if you remember that. And he loved this part where the comedian said that, guys, we could call each other names and just laugh. And so he said, the comedian said he could call his friend Butt Wipe everywhere. And Andy loved that. So every time he saw me, he'd say, hey, Butt Wipe, how you doing? Or every time he called me, he would say, hey, Butt Wipe. And some people didn't understand it. They were looking at me. It's hard to explain where we got that from, or where he got that from, but he also had a sense of humor, and I love that about him. And I miss him dearly. I miss confiding in him and getting advice from him. He always made time for me. He made time for every resident in the township. We were a better township because of Andy, and it's a huge loss for me. It's a huge loss for this township. And I know he's looking down on us today, and he's shaking his head. He's telling me, hurry up, Butt Wipe, finish up. So I will. Thank you all for coming. I know he would love the fact that you're here. And thank you, Andy.
Thank you, Steve. Next, I'm going to call up Dr. Gail Farrelly Cimarat. And Gail is with the Brentford Civic Association, which is also in Andy's ward.
Good afternoon, everyone. I kind of, when I was asked to speak about Andy, I thought to myself, where do I begin? Andy has been such a part of my life as both a friend and a mentor. I first met Andy diligently, meeting him and with a cause when I became Haverford Adult Schools president, the adult school president. And we sat down for coffee. Seems like he likes to have breakfast, doesn't it? Yeah, he likes breakfast meetings. We sat down for coffee and he was explaining to me, I explained to him how, I was out looking for finances, right? And he said to me, well, let's think about some other ways that we can look at this. And he suggested that I go and talk to the commissioners, because many of them didn't know that the Haverford Township Adult School was not a line item in either the township or the school board funds. And so I was able to present to the commissioners and opened up a lot of eyes. And it didn't stop there. Andy continued to support the adult school through his emails, through registration classes, announcements, fundraisers, and through a mentoring for myself, my personal relationship with Andy, in regard to really kind of getting me more involved civically. It was so important for him to really promote civic engagement in the members, in his constituents. And he was my greatest supporter as I acquired a position on the Haverford Township Civic Council, and more recently as president of the Britain for Civic Association. I know for myself, I could never have achieved these goals without the friendship and the support of Andy Lewis. That is my story. I know that many of you in this room have your own story about how Andy touched your life. I know that probably he hasn't even a clue how much he has affected so many people. And I feel very honored to be able to stand here, tell my story, share it with you, and like the others, I miss him dearly. And it was a gut punch when I heard of his passing. But I am so thrilled that Haverford Township has taken this lead and has named this park after him. What a tribute. Thank you so much.
And our last speaker is Mario Oliva. Mario was and is chairman of Recreation and good friend of Andy's and commissioner of the second ward. Mario?
Thank you, Tim. I would like to start by thanking the Board of Commissioners and the Park Board for unanimously supporting the renaming of this park from Community Park to Andy Lewis Community Park. For all his hard work here. I wanted to also thank all those who were in this, who helped put this together today. Brian Barrett, Eileen Matola, Pat Biswanger, who couldn't be here, Wendy Lewis, Russie Lewis, Gene Angel, and Tim Denny, and also Scott Zeloff, who's in the audience today. I had the honor of giving this talk at Marion on August 30th at the event to raise funds for CAD, the brain disease that took Andy's life. It is again my honor to share this with you today. My mother always told me, your friends should make you a better person. Andy made me a better person. Just like he made everyone he knew a better person. And he made Haverford a better place to live. In countless ways, Andy showed us all the value of his hard work and diligence and the importance of not cutting corners. Andy never asked you to do something he wouldn't do himself. And in fact, he often did things himself rather than delegate them so he could make sure it was done right. An example of Andy's approach was when he decided to run a write-in campaign 6 weeks before Election Day. As he did in all his campaigns, Andy knocked on every door in the ward, often more than once, and kept notes on who he met, what they talked about, and what mattered to them. Andy also wrote over 1,000 handwritten personal notes to voters asking them for their vote. He planned out months in advance how many notes he'd have to do every night. Excuse me. Leading up to election day, and faithfully kept that schedule. I often watched him write the notes. 30 notes a night he used to do. And his lawn signs, he started at 4 a.m. We could start at 4 a.m. driving with a trunk full of lawn signs. Oh man, I'm gonna make it through, I promise. He put most of them up by himself, so he could make sure they were positioned perfectly, exactly how they had to be. Excuse me. It all paid off. I never forgot that sight on election day when Bernie McCabe, the judge of elections, opened the voting machine, and then seeing that paper roll out, across the floor, see his name handwritten. All you could see was Andy Lewis through the whole roll. And we looked at each other and knew he had won big. He got more votes than the Republican and the Democrat combined. Again, we learned from Andy the value of hard work and diligence. Another example was when Eddie was first elected commissioner, he dealt with the Haverford Reserve development. Andy took a really bad deal and made it a great thing for the taxpayers. It was like turning around a battleship, and Andy did it. Andy always demonstrated the importance of honesty at any cost, of always standing up for what he believed in. People trusted him because they knew he'd never lied to them. Perhaps Andy's greatest legacy and most significant lesson he taught us was the importance of civility in our dealings with one another. Throughout all the day-to-day work of a commissioner, Andy always conducted himself in a gracious, polite manner, no matter how someone else acted. Andy never lost his temper, not in public. He treated everyone equally with dignity and respect. I don't know why Andy took an interest in Haverford Township politics or why he took an interest in me. I just thank God that he did it. He made me a better person, and he made Haverford a better community. My mother would be very pleased. Thank you very much. I'm sorry about all the crying.
Thank you, Mario. A lot of what others have said just fits into the talk I'm about to give. And I was asked if I could go a little bit into detail about some of the things our speakers made reference to of how this very special park got here. And what a special effort, an unbelievable effort it took on Andy's part to make it happen. And you'll hear more about this park up at Freedom Playground after lunch when Brian Barrett tells you some of the awards that we've won here. I don't know if I introduced myself. My name is Tim Denny, and I worked for the township for 40 years. And I was the director of Parks and Recreation, and also the assistant township manager. In that capacity, I went to a number of park dedications over the years. They're always nice, but you know, some of them are for this little league coach or this person, and they're always good and well-deserved, but there's usually probably a dozen other people who also are equally deserving. And that's what makes it so challenging when you decide to name something after somebody. But in this case, I guarantee you, we would not be here sitting in this building, in this park, if it were not for the efforts of Andy Lewis in 2003, 2004, 2005. It simply would not have happened. It's a compelling story. When I first met Andy, as I used to tell him, when I first met Andy, he had brown hair and he was a Republican. And most brown-haired Republicans, he was not at all what anybody would call a tree hugger. He was a supporter of parks, but certainly not way over here as a big advocate of green space. What he was an advocate of was doing things right, doing things honestly, doing things fairly, being open and transparent. That's what he was an advocate of. He was an advocate of all the things that are important, because what he did here was amazing. How he did it was even more amazing. He rode into town like a white, like a knight in shining armor. Just when we needed a knight in shining armor to straighten us out. And why he did it is even most amazing. He did it because that's who he is. All the things you heard our speakers say: honesty, fairness, decency. More than anything, I think, Andy was a decent human being. I think he exemplified all the good parts of an Eagle Scout. He's reverent, honest, courteous, courageous. And Andy was proud to be an Eagle Scout. Of course, as one of my kids said years ago, isn't it great when really nice people are also rich? And to really understand this story, you need to have a little bit of history on Haverford State Hospital and delve a little bit into the politics. And I don't want to go too deep into it, but it certainly is a big part of the story. I'll begin a little bit with the politics. I started in 1980. I was hired through a federal grant. There was no recreation department. It was an 18-month grant. So I knew absolutely nothing about township politics, completely naive. My first day, I walked out in the hallway. A woman came out of the codes department, cigarette in her mouth. She said, "Who are you?" I said, "I'm Tim Denny, the new rec guy. I'm working in the copy office there." She said, "Who do you know?" I said, "Well, I met Mickey, the receptionist." She said, "Don't be cute with me, kid. Who do you know?" I didn't have a clue what she was talking about. Over the years, I came to understand a little better some of the. So Haverford Township moves along. Very much one-party town. An amazing thing happened in 2001, where the Republican Party kind of split, and one group kind of sided or combined forces with the one Democrat on the board, Rob Schumel. And that gave them a majority. And then 2003, one of those people switched over. So the old guard now had the majority again, and it was payback time. But there was other things going on too. So moving to Haverford State Hospital, a little bit of the history there. The hospital was built in 1964. Hospital was built in 1964. In 1997, the state announced they were closing. In 1999, Board of Commissioners did a township-wide survey. And that survey came out, in simplest terms, about 70% of the people wanted to have open space, some kind of community recreation facilities here. So it's the overriding impact. In 2001, a study was done for a master plan, and that master plan came back with 3 recommendations, the top recommendation being that most of it should be preserved for community use, open space and community recreation, with a small portion being sold off to help pay for the event. So moving forward in 2002, Hartford Township, after a lot of debate, purchased the land from the state for $3.5 million. And then 2003 came along. But before I go to the next thing, I want to give you kind of an overview, and I thought maybe a way to do that. This was a paper that was done by a Hartford College student, his senior thesis, and it was on planning and civic engagement. His name was Luke Henderson, and Luke gave me a copy of his paper when it was all done. To quote Larry, if you don't mind, I'll read from the book of Luke. Here we go. I'm just going to read a couple readings, but I thought it might give you an overall picture if you're not familiar with it. The law development history is characterized by increasing levels of public interest and participation in the planning process, a period of turnover of leadership and planners involved, and one of the largest political scandals in township history, resulting in a grand jury trial and suspension of a commissioner. Judging from ongoing local coverage of the story, progress has been occurred in two chronological stages, with a third stage just beginning in 2007. And again, Luke wrote this in 2007, and he was interested because he had been following it so much in the papers. Some of you here are old enough to remember when we used to have local newspapers? So it was a big item in the local papers constantly, because it was huge. It was the biggest thing that in township history. And so Luke goes on to describe it. He says the first phase was from 1997 to 2003. I'll just read a little bit. In April 2003, the Township Board voted contentiously, 5-4, to hire Philadelphia attorney and entrepreneur Jeff Rotwick. And then he says down here in his footnotes, the private seeking out hiring of this planner was revealed in 2007 grand jury report to be part of a politically ambitious plot to control the development process by a faction of commissioners, including George Twardy, Fred Moran, Carol McDonald, Joe Kelly, Mr. Serino. And then he goes on to say, the final straw came when Commissioner Andy Lewis learned of an unauthorized wire transfer of $600,000 of township money to planner Jeffrey Rotwick's account on the last day of December of 2003, and publicly confronted the commissioners. Further on, he says, from this point, 2004, November 2006, the project entered its second most critical stage. During this span, the Board of Commissioners created new boards, and by August 2006, the township had finally prepared and entered into a second plan, a different plan than the original plan in 2003. So this process is by no means over, but it is in a more mature stage and arguably a more peaceful stage than in many, many years. So that's from Luke. It gives you a sense. And now I'm just going to walk you through that a little bit. That's the old state hospital. And basically, road coming in, where we are right now, is kind of right here. That was an old coal power plant that powered all the stuff. That was when it was built in 1960. The state said they must use Pennsylvania coal to power the building. You are now sitting in a geothermal gold LEED certified building on the exact spot where that was. And then there was 23 buildings on the site. This is all a developed area of the site. And there was a hospital building, a warehouse, power plant, and then 20 dormitories. So that's what we had. And it had been sitting empty for quite a while. This picture here tells a lot. If any of you are people who read body language, this is a great, great picture. And the reason being, if you notice, this gentleman here with the Cheshire grin, that's our township manager, kind of hiding his head. You get the sense they know something the rest of them don't know. And you're right. There's also 2 commissioners missing One was the commissioner who switched sides, and the other was the 5th Ward commissioner who Andy replaced. And she was actually living in Florida at the time, and they would fly her up periodically for meetings. So that was sort of the political realities. The other thing in 2003, at least from my perspective, 4 big things happened. Number 1, Andy was elected. Huge. Cannot overstate. 2, I was suspended for a week without pay. That was kind of big at home. 3, as I mentioned, one of the commissioners, Joe Kelly, switched sides. So all of a sudden they were back in power. And then 4, Jeff Rotwood was hired by that new majority to take over the process. So there we are. This was the initial agreement plan. And what strikes you, this is what was signed in December 2003, okay, when they had this majority. And there's a couple things about this. See these fields here? Not only are they really tiny, but they were down there on steep slopes. There was one field, literally had a 68-foot drop from one to the other, from one end to the other. The other thing that might strike you is there's no place to park. This was a shame. It wasn't real. And I'll be the first to admit, I grew up in Savage Township, my wife grew up in Savage Township, our kids are raised in Savage Township. I felt a duty, like we have this once in a lifetime opportunity to make something great and have it for Township. And it's not going to happen. It was obvious it was not going to happen. Fortunately, I happened to know Todd Pollock. He was friends with my brother, went to school, and one day he came to visit me. He said, Tim, I've never run into anything like this. They're telling me to put the fields on paper, but they're not real. They're never going to happen. It would cost millions and millions, and you've got all these stormwater and conservation issues. It's not going to happen. He said, I don't know what's going on. Anyway, so when people ask me what I thought of the plan, I said it was a terrible plan. Because I felt like I owed it. Brian, who worked with me, we owed it to all the sports group, the lacrosse players, the soccer players. We can't tell you this. It's not a good plan. It's not going to happen, and we need field space in the township. Anyway, as you can probably tell, I felt pretty strongly about it. But what to do about it? Anyway, I got suspended for a week from the pay. That's one thing you can do about it, right? And at the order of people you saw. So, here it is, Christmas 2003. Andy Lewis has been elected. I've just been told I've been suspended. He comes down to our office. He wants to introduce himself to the staff. He says, Merry Christmas, gives me a box of candy. And I said, Andy, can I talk to you now? I said, what did you think of that letter I gave you? He said, what letter? I said, well, I've just been suspended for including you in a letter that I sent to the Board of Commissioners, because we were always taught that when you had a new elected official, include them in any correspondence so that they would come into office, know what's going on, and that was the way it was done. So I did that, and I got suspended for that. And he said, I never got your letter. I said, you never got the letter? So that was a little odd. Anyway, fast forward, that's the last week of December. Fast forward, the first meeting, January 2004. We're sitting there at a commissioners meeting. You ever been on a team that just kept getting walloped and walloped and walloped, like the Sixers used to? And then they got Moses Malone. Whoa. Well, I'm sitting there in a commissioners meeting thinking, the team is really taking some hits. And all of a sudden, Andy got up and from his seat as a new commissioner, went to the podium where the public usually speaks and blasted them. And it was electric. And I thought to myself, we are back. Anyway, I knew Andy was on something. I didn't know what he knew, but it was an electric moment and he was blasting them for some kind of $600,000 illegal payment. And I didn't know what he knew, but I knew he knew something. And I thought, this is fabulous. Whatever is going on is great. So, fortunately, some people got up and defended him. This is Andy. This is actually 2010, but the same kind of thing was happening. As you can see, Andy spoke strongly and clearly. Times were changing. He took this deal that seemingly was a done deal. It said, Mario said he turned a battleship around. I used to say, you're like Superman. You stopped the train that had left the station, but he needed help because he was still in the minority. And part of it was how to get help. And I said to him, Andy, I believe 70% of the people want this. That's what they said in the survey. If you can find people who support this, I think they'll win. You know, support what the people want. And that's what Andy started doing. And I told him my job would be to try to educate people, let them know what's going on. And in the interim, Steve D'Amelio, as he mentioned, he started seeing the light. As Larry said, he came over to the other side because he was in the dark. No one had told him what was going on with those previous plans. And then, see that fresh-faced young boy there? He found Larry, and he supported Larry. See that handsome guy there? He beat Joe Kelly, who had been a commissioner for 30 years. And all of a sudden now, he had a majority. Called the Recreation Revolution. He changed Haverford Township. Paradise was saved. 10 years from 1997 to 2007. It was a long, long road. There's Steve signing it, New Deal. 2007, that was December of 2006. 2007, so we stood out here right on January 1st. There's Andy, there's Steve. We tried to organize a group of all the different people who would benefit from this, trying to show it was the whole community. And that there is my saying, I used to call that my PowerPoint presentation right there. So I brought it with me wherever I wanted to try and show people. As fate would have it, a couple months later, the grand jury report comes out, and just by coincidence came out in 2007. As a result, the township manager resigned, and Larry Gentili was named the new township manager. I don't know if Larry's here, but it was great working with Larry all those years. And Andy said to me, what should we do with Haverford State? And I said, Andy, our code calls for an assistant township manager to take on special projects. Somebody's got to take on this. The only way it's going to happen, the way I believe it could happen, is if somebody's really focused on it. Because we were not done. So anyway, I was named assistant township manager, and that was the new plan. Construction finally began in June of 2007. And as Steve said in that article, he said this would not have happened without Andy Lewis. Andy Lewis got us back on track. As Andy said, it took a while, but we did it right. Most important was to get it right. Just a little bit of before and after. What used to be there in 2007, we started building the walking trails. 2008, we started building the ball fields. And I want to point out this, I'm making it seem like it was easy. It wasn't easy. It was still a lot of convincing. There was different interest groups in the township, but it was all above board. It was all out in the open. It was all the normal way that local government should work. You know, that different people have their own interests, and that's fine. But it wasn't anything hidden or secret or behind closed doors. Turned into the CrossFit, went down 2009, 2010. We built Freedom Playground, dog park. And in 2011, one of the things I met with Andy again at the Country Squire. That's where I had breakfast with Andy. And he was not a commissioner after doing all this. You know, he had done his work, and as Larry pointed out, moved on. He was not a commissioner, but we had breakfast one morning, and he wasn't sure about an indoor facility, as most of the Board of Commissioners were not. And one of his concerns was the finances of it. I said, Andy, do me a favor, remain neutral. Just remain neutral, and let me convince them. And this building is, not only is it green sustainable, but it's financially sustainable. And has been. There it is. There's the handsome guy cutting the ribbon. It was Flag Day, so. And somebody came up to me a few years ago, Chris Whiting, he was president of Civic Council, and he said, Tim, what you were able to do up at the reserve changed Haverford Township. It changed how we thought about ourselves. It changed what we thought was possible. And I said, Chris, it wasn't me. It was Andy Lewis. Without Andy Lewis, it wouldn't have happened. I also would be remiss if I didn't mention Jan Marie Rushforth. Jan Marie was a huge advocate for the open space. 10 years every month, right? Every month she came to the commissioners' meeting dressed in green. And unfortunately, Jan Marie passed in 2017 from cancer, but the environmental room downstairs is named in her honor. And then lastly, when I retired 2 years ago, almost exactly 2 years ago, the board graciously honored me by naming the gymnasium. Denny, anyway. Thank you. For a gym rat like myself, it just doesn't get better than that, honestly. It simply doesn't get better than that. When I was 12, I used to say, if I ever get rich, I'm going to build my own gym. Well, I never got rich. I actually played basketball this morning. I still love the game. So, and it was truly an honor. Truly an honor. But the greater honor was knowing Andy Lewis and having the opportunity to work with Andy Lewis to make all of this happen. He was a great man. Thank you. And now to review, our plan is to process out. And for those who wish to, we're going to walk over to a tree that's been planted in Andy's name. And for those who wish to, we're going to invite the family and the Board of Commissioners, pour some water on that tree, and anyone else who would like to. Then we're going to move up to the flagpole where there's a plaque, and our Board of Commissioners President, Jerry and Brian will be there at that plaque and organize that. And then Wendy has done a great job of organizing lunch for us. And then the rec department will give a little review as we eat our lunch as to how this facility is used and the many users of it. So again, I'm going to ask you to process out. If you care to join us over to where the tree is being planted. Wendy Lewis is going to say a few words, and then she's going to invite members of the Lewis family and the Board of Commissioners and the Park Board and anybody else who would like to put some water on Andy's tree, and especially former commissioners, especially. Jim McGarrity here with us. He was here for a while. Another good friend. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Wendy.
Hello to all of you, and thank you for being here today. Before I say a few words, I would like to personally thank you for your support that you have provided since the passing of Andy. It has continued from the weeks where he was sick to this day. Additionally, I would like to extend my deepest appreciation and gratitude to everyone who has made this special day happen. Andy's dearest friend, Mario Oliva, and the entire Haverford Township Board of Commissioners. Pat Biswinger, who unfortunately couldn't be here today, Scott Zeloff, Eileen Matola, Brian Barrett, and of course, Tim Denny, former Township Commission Assistant Manager and Director of Parks and Recreation, and a great friend of Andy's. Tim, you're supposed to be retired, but you willingly organized and built this special day with your tremendous experience, your guidance, your logic, your sensitivity, and your kindness. You don't know this, but we had ideas everywhere. They were literally just bouncing off the walls. And Tim brought them in, and he made this what it is today. I'm so grateful for you and what you have done tonight. I look around and I see the faces and the friends and the neighbors who are all here in support of our greatly missed Andy Lewis. I can't help but think and compare how powerful a large group can be, but also the power of one individual. Haverford Township is a community Andy was extremely proud to serve. He loved serving his neighbors, the businesses, the associations, the volunteer groups, the churches. You may not realize this, but this community was everything to Andy. For as much as you feel he gave to the township, you gave to him. I remember so many examples of Andy's tireless dedication to his constituents, from stopping daily at the never-ending College Avenue Bridge restoration, talking to his constituents at all hours of the day, posting lost pets, and even shoveling driveways for those in need. Behind the scenes of his township superhero ways, Andy had difficulty taking that hat off. I often bugged and sometimes begged him to slow down, to be in the moment, to enjoy the here and the now, and above all, find peace in the simplicity of solitude. Ironically, I'm standing here in front of this beautiful tree and this beautiful park, surrounded by all of you who I know miss him daily and thank him for all he did. Please know when you leave here today that Andy loved being your commissioner. He loved it. This young tree beside me is called a bur oak. It's known for its many branches, which sometimes grow horizontally, which is a tremendous tree to climb on. It can live up to 300 years. And my favorite part is that as it grows older, it will drop large acorns. And the squirrels will also thank Andy. Thank you so much to the Haverford Township Tree Tenders for this timeless contribution. And in a few minutes, we're going to ask you all to head to the pavilion, where we will have the official unveiling of Andy's plaque. Before we conclude, please know how much this means to me. I miss you, Andy, every day. And I would like Gracie and Ellie, Annabelle, first to give this tree a drink of water. So if they're here,
It's not sweet.
and anyone else who wants to come in and add some water, please do. Thank you all. I'm going to head up to the pavilion and enjoy this tree.
Thank you all for coming. It's a great honor for me to be here. When Brian asked me to say a few words, before we unveil it, he sort of knew that I would say a few words. When trying to think about what to say today, I kept going back to one of my favorite movies. It's one I've seen dozens of times. Probably most of you have seen it. It's a Wonderful Life. For those few of you who may not have seen it, the main character is a man named George Bailey who grows up in a town called Bedford Falls and is at a low point in his life and really says, I wish I should never have been born. And luckily his guardian angel named Clarence comes down and sort of replays life without George Bailey, what would have happened. And the town of Bedford Falls instead turns out a depressing town of Potterville. So I don't think this place would ever be Potterville, but it's certainly, if not for Andy, we could be sitting in the Tuarty development or Kellyville. So we have much, really, he made a tremendous impact on us all. It was not something Andy did alone, but as everybody has said before this, it could not be done without Andy. He was really the prime mover. And when the board got together, there was really no other place that we could think of where we could honor him, which would really show his impact on our community. So let me have Maya come up. We're doing double duty today, pouring water and go ahead. For those of you who I'll just read it. Commissioner Andy Lewis. His ability, integrity, and hard work were pivotal in preserving the land for this park to be cherished by future generations. As you enjoy these ball fields, playground trails, and nature, emulate his spirit and make a positive difference by sharing the best in yourself with those around you. October 24, 2021. Thank you, and now we're all invited to lunch.